Hey there, welcome back to the channel. We're working on this Slant 6 again. Today we're going to learn how to assemble the rockers and rocker shafts on this engine. It's a little bit different between the old style and the new style. There's a couple of different things to keep an eye out for. It's not hard, but you just need to pay attention to what you're doing so you don't assemble it wrong. Let's get to it. Once you've cleaned up all of the pieces, you want to just check for wear. We want to take a look at this end of the rocker arms, make sure that that is shiny and doesn't appear to have anything that's like a pit. You should be able to feel it and not feel any kind of wear on it. Check this adjuster. This goes into the push rod. Make sure it's smooth, not rough. The rocker shaft hold downs, you just want to make sure that these bolts are, not bent or anything. They're in good shape. The rocker shaft itself, you want to make sure that you can't feel any wear on it. You can see that it's been rubbing here from the rockers moving, but I can't feel any of that. So this is fine for reuse. Then lastly, we want to check the actual push rods. These we want to make sure they're straight. So put them on a flat, clean bench, hanging over the edge here so the cup is hanging over, and we just want to roll it. You want to look here to make sure that the center isn't lifting up and going down, and you want to keep an eye on this end to make sure that it's not doing this on the table. So you just roll them. That one looks very good. So go through all 12 of them and make sure they're all straight. You want to replace anything that has deflection up here, or if they, bow up like this as it comes around so that you can see light underneath of it. Either one indicates a bent push rod and you want to replace it. These push rods are welded together, so you'll see a weld spot here where this cup is welded into it. And then again over here, you can see that weld spot. Those are fine. Really what we want to look at is just straightness. The first thing we want to do for assembly is put the push rods in. If we take a look here, you can see a lifter right there. Yeah. There's one there and one there. Basically between every one of these bolts, there's going to be two lifters. You want to drop them down in so the ball goes down and sits in the lifter. Kind of hard to see with the light here, but that's how it goes. This is going to be floating around a bunch, and we're going to have to get those underneath each one of the rockers, but we don't have to worry about that right now. Just get them all in place. Next, we're going to assemble the rocker shaft, so put all the rocker arms on this. It's important to understand, though, you can see they've got these oiling holes, and only on one side, right? So these holes need to face toward the valve springs. Now there are two different designs of this rocker shaft. This one has a large hole here and a small hole here. Every other hole is large except this one. The small hole goes to the rear, so back by the firewall. And the reason is that bolt hole at the very back, oil comes up through there and it comes past this bolt. You can see it's necked down here. All of the other hold down bolts are the size of this shoulder up here. This one is necked down and it goes through here and into that small hole. The other bolts will not fit. So you actually, if you're putting the bolt into the rear, this one here, and obviously the hole and threads are smaller, you can't get it wrong. But the way to remember it is these holes point toward the valve springs. Let's go over to the bench and assemble this. When we assemble the rocker shaft, it's important that these are aligned properly. Nicely, unlike the small block LAs, these are not asymmetric, so we don't have to worry about a left or a right, but we do have to make sure that they're pointing in the right direction. I've got these oil holes here. They're facing that direction, so the small hole here So this is the rear. So we're going to assemble them so they're all pointing with the part that goes on the valve that direction. Between each pair, so this is an exhaust and an intake, we have one of these spacers. So it'll be exhaust, spacer, intake, then there will be a bolt, exhaust, spacer, intake, bolt, exhaust, spacer, intake, bolt, and then on the other half it goes intake, exhaust. So the exhausts are toward the outside. So these three, the exhausts are this direction, and these three, the exhausts are that direction. Doesn't matter at this point, but it's just interesting to know. We'll need to know that when we do the lash on them. These rockers will go on either end, so I like to just put this through. This way they can't fall out. And then we're going to put some assembly lube on the inside of these before we slide each one down. For assembly, I like to use this Lubriplate 105. It's like a white lithium. It's a thicker grease. If you use something like the Permatex assembly lube, which is thin, if you put it on things and then the motor sits for, a week or a couple of weeks, my fear is always that the oil will run off of whatever I have. If you have something like this and you're using a thicker grease, it won't run off. So you can let it sit on the stand for weeks or months or whatever and not worry about it being dry when you go to start it up. So we just take some of this, put it on our finger, and lubricate the inside of this rocker. And slide it down on the shaft. Then the spacer, that doesn't necessarily need to be lubed. Then our next rocker. And we just need to do the remaining 10 of them. You can put the hold down bolts in at this point as you're assembling. It's a little bit easier than having to shift everything over. If you don't, it's not a big deal. You can push the valve rockers one way or the other and still get them in after the fact. Some rocker shafts will have two different size of these spacers. So notice this one's thin and this one's a bit wider. There will be one of these. This one goes right there. So it's the center one. Now we'll take this over and put it on the head, but before we do, I want to take this assembly lube and I'm going to lubricate the cups on all of the push rods. That way these adjusters go into something lubricated. Okay, now it's time to position it. Gravity, unfortunately, makes all the rockers want to sit opposite the direction we want. Okay, I've got them all flipped over. It's fairly easy. I usually start at the back and just walk your way toward the front. Since the push rods are just out of the way, they swing around pretty easily. The next step is to start at the rear and move forward and get each one of the push rods underneath the adjuster nut on each rocker. Once you have them all in, go back and double check that they're all seated, both in the adjuster and down in the lifter down below. Make sure the spacers on each of the bolts is down all the way against the shaft, not sitting on one of the rockers, and then hand tighten them down to hold everything in place. It's worth noting that back there we have that narrow one that goes through a small hole. Some of these older heads, in fact I think a lot of these older heads, they don't have a small hole back there. They're the same size hole all the way down. If that's the case, you're going to find that you have one long bolt and then a bunch of short ones. The long bolt goes all the way down there at the back side. Now that we have everything in, we're going to torque these down. We go to 25 foot-pounds. Start in the middle and move out for a torque sequence. Torque these down to 25 foot-pounds. Once you have them all torqued down, go back and triple check every one of those push rods. Alright, now that that's torqued down, really the next thing to do is I have to put the intake and exhaust manifolds on, the carburetor, all the linkage up there, and put some spark plugs into it. We'll do that in another video, so that's all there is for now. Thanks for watching.